I'm joined by one of the world's leading minds in this fight against COVID-19. He's the World Health Organization's Special Envoy on COVID-19. Dr. David Nabarro is joining me from Geneva. I appreciate you joining us, sir. You're joining us in a week where the global deaths of COVID-19 have crossed 500,000, where the total positive cases are 10 million at the moment, and cases are climbing in India as well, sir. And the WHO Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus says the worst is yet to come. What do you mean, sir, that the worst is yet to come when the figures are rising in the manner that they are? This could spread fear, sir.
Thank you very much. First thing I'd like to say is that Tedros is indicating that this virus is here to stay. It's not going to disappear anytime soon. It's a dangerous virus. And so as a human family, we're all going to need to do what we can to try to keep the virus at bay. And that means continuing, as we've seen throughout India, to do everything possible to interrupt transmission as soon as it occurs and to be able to deal with outbreaks, suppressing them very quickly. There are still hundreds of millions of people in our world who are susceptible to this virus and the disease it causes. And that's why we're being very clear that there will be continuing COVID for the foreseeable future.
Continuing COVID in the foreseeable future, you're telling us, Dr. Nabarro. These are extremely troubling words at the moment. When you say this, is the WHO therefore telling the world this is the new normal, be prepared for a long haul, there are no magic solutions, not even physical distancing, not even lockdowns, there is no real solution beyond a point to control the spread of coronavirus?
Well, I'd just like to intervene here. But from my perspective, just echoing the words of the Director General Tedros, I'd be saying there is a solution, and that is that we will need, as humanity, to continue changing our behavior to reduce the risk of transmission of the virus, and we will need to be able to deal with outbreaks as and when they come. That doesn't mean having lockdowns of the kind that you've done in India for weeks. Instead, it means being able to react very quickly in a localized area when we know there is an outbreak developing. It'll take us a bit of time, I think, to get used to what this means. And at the beginning, it might be quite stressful. But my prediction is that in the coming weeks and months, we will collectively shift our behavior so that we can live with the threat of COVID and get on with our economies, with our societies, and indeed with moving forward towards greater prosperity and equity.
Dr. Nabarro, the concern, it seems, that the WHO DG was voicing, and maybe you also are, is that countries are unlocking too fast at the moment. And to that extent, perhaps shows that it's not just that we have to live with the virus, but we also have to take the virus. We cannot take the virus for granted. Presumably, there is a difference between living with the virus and taking the virus for granted by unlocking. Absolutely.
Yes. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's just the fact that we're doing this remotely. If I could just be very clear on this. Dr. Tedros does not want anybody to underestimate this virus. There were people at the beginning who said it's just like a mild flu, whereas we're saying actually it's revealing more to us all the time, and we're saying please take it really seriously. So that's why we're saying living with the virus means being able to defend against the virus. It doesn't mean taking it for granted. It doesn't mean giving up. In fact, it means really being super robust and strong to fight against the virus as a common foe.
Are you therefore saying, Dr. Nabarro, it would be in the best interest of India, or for that matter any country, not to unlock too fast at the moment?
Well, a lockdown is a very crude instrument for dealing with a virus like this. It basically holds the virus pretty much where it is. Of course, you still get some spread, but you delay the spread a lot. Now, you've got to release the lockdown sooner or later. And that's because it's causing so much economic and social disruption. But we are saying, as you release your lockdown, please make sure that you've done everything possible to build up the capacity of your public health services to be able to interrupt transmission and suppress outbreaks. I think we try very hard not to make any remark that implies criticism of a government. We know that each government is facing really difficult choices as they deal with this virus. But we are saying, as you release lockdown, remember you will get increased movement, remember you will get more cases, and therefore you must have the best possible defences, and please focus on those places which you know are particularly difficult, like densely crowded urban settlements where we have seen India has had to struggle to get the virus under control.
So the reason I'm asking this is that let's look at India specifically now. Just look at the corona numbers, sir, in India. The corona acceleration, as I call it. The jump, for example, from 1 case to 100,000 cases in India, Dr. Nabarro, took what? 110 days. But it's taken just 5 days to move from 500,000 cases now to 600,000. Is that a worry? Should India be worried at the sheer pace of growth now of the virus?
Yeah, it certainly is accelerating. But I want to stress that if this virus is moving without any restraint, it's capable of having a doubling time of around 2.5 days, i.e. you move from 100,000 to 200,000 really quickly. And actually, at the moment, the rate of spread, although it's still getting quicker, it's nothing like as quick as it would be without proper action being taken. So yes, it is a concern that the rate of spread is speeding up. And I know that authorities are looking at this, but I want to stress that it's nothing like as fast as it would be if there was no action being taken.
But then should we as a country be looking at this acceleration number at the COVID positive cases as the top line, or should we be focusing, Dr. Nabarro, on the fatality rate, which in India is around 3%? Is fatality rate and recovery rate the real key numbers now to look at continuously?
There are so many factors that need to be looked at by a government when deciding strategy. You see, the number of positive cases is an important figure, but it is hugely influenced by the availability of testing and also by the extent to which people are prepared to be swabbed for tests. The death rates are important, and in fact, they're often the most profound indicator of all. But again, there are settings where not every person who dies of COVID is recorded, and perhaps even some of those who die not of COVID are mistakenly classed as COVID. By and large, in India, your death statistics are pretty good. But there are other indicators that I think are important. One is the percentage of tests that is positive. Usually, if you run a major control program, you're expecting about 3 or 4% positive. If the percent positive rate in a particular area starts to go up, then that's a suggestion that transmission is increasing. And then lastly, we are all the time interested in the capacity of local authorities to be able to respond quickly in case a new outbreak develops. That might actually be the most important indicator of all, and it's based more on a judgment as to whether or not in each of your districts you do have the capacity to respond quickly and close an outbreak down. And because I've been getting a lot of information from colleagues throughout the country just sharing with me their actually pride at what they've been able to do. I do find myself impressed that capacity to suppress outbreaks seems to be pretty widespread in India, and that's why many districts are still, as you say, I think, green and in good state.
But Dr. Nabarro, the positive rate, the corona positive rate in India is now around 7 to 8%. Now that's getting to that danger area. It's well above what we are seeing in Russia, which is say 2 to 3%. Is that a big worry? Is that again something we have to simply come to terms with, that as the spread continues, the number of cases will rise, especially those with mild symptoms, and then look at improving the health systems? The key is to ensure that there are enough hospital beds and the health systems are in place.
I think that your conclusion is the one that I would support. You know, the real thing is to focus on the performance of the public health system. And we have to remember that this is requiring a constant capacity to be able to detect cases and then to isolate them and to trace contacts. It's tough work, and it's particularly tough in densely populated urban areas. And it's monsoon and it's hot. So altogether, it's difficult. And I think the really extraordinary thing is the overall capacity of public health services in India is strong. It's varied, of course, from some districts. You've got better performance than in other districts. But in general, I would give that the main emphasis. I think this 8% positivity rate on testing, and I heard that it had gone up, is a slight concern, because it makes one think that perhaps in some areas there is an increase in numbers of cases. What I would want to do is to try to check these percent positivity rate figures disaggregated, at least by state and ideally by district, and then it becomes a bit easier to make sense of them. In summary, as we move forward, the really most valuable data are the data that are disaggregated by quite small administrative units. That makes it much easier to understand where the virus is. It tends to be very focal, and you want to be able to track it a bit like detective with a magnifying glass. You want to really be able to get down to the local level. If we look at some other countries, they're not finding it that easy to do it, even in Europe. So I quite understand if it's taking a bit of time. But in the end, it is the precision of local level data that are key to moving forward.
I think that's a very valuable point you're putting, but let me disaggregate some of those statistics for you, Dr. Nabarro. In India, 3 to 4 states now continue to account for more than 60% of the COVID cases. The urban centers remain the focus of the spread. Should we be concerned in that sense that it is possible that in these areas, in a Mumbai, in a Delhi, in a Tamil Nadu, there is community spread? Should we be concerned that and get used to the fact that there may be community spread out there?
So in coronavirus situations, the capacity to find cases and isolate them, and then find as many contacts as possible and isolate them, remains at the heart of the control effort. Some people have suggested that when numbers are high, you could dispense with the contact tracing and just do isolation of cases. I understand that logic, but I would stress that actually the success of interrupting transmission and stopping the spread really does come from the contact tracing, at least as much as from the identification and isolation of cases. So I would encourage efforts to continue doing contact tracing as much as possible, even when you've got high levels of transmission. I do understand from looking at the data that you have much higher levels of COVID being reported from certain states. And therefore the classification of the kind of transmission in these high level states seems to be a different one. Personally, I think the decision as to whether or not you use the label of community transmission is something that can only be made by the officials of the government of India. From my own perspective, I do want everybody to appreciate that it really will be important over the next few weeks and I believe months to continue to focus on doing everything possible to interrupt transmission, whether it is just localized or more broad in the community. That has to be the focus of everything that's being done.
So in a sense, we are going back to the tracing, testing, quarantine system. We have increased testing in India, Dr. Nabarro. We are now testing, what, 200,000 a day, which is much higher than what it was earlier, much less perhaps compared to certain other countries in the West. Do you believe it's enough, the level of testing now in India for a country of 1.38 billion people?
Of course, in India, to scale up testing, even to the level you're at the moment, is an extraordinary achievement. And I want to repeat that, an extraordinary achievement. This is a difficult test to do. It involves multiple reagents, and you have to do it in a laboratory that's quite well developed. Now, yes, it would be a good idea to continue to build up your testing capacity so that you can get a more granular impression of where the virus is. But at the same time, I believe that with the current level of testing, you can continue to do an awful lot. So I don't want to prescribe an increase in testing. Instead, I want to ask that you continue to adopt this comprehensive approach of people interrupting transmission and then suppressing outbreaks. And that, I believe, gives you the best chance of continuing what you're doing at the moment, I think, well, which is getting ahead of the virus. And there will be fluctuations and some upsets about numbers of cases, but overall, I have the impression that you are really keeping at least abreast of the virus if you're not ahead of it.
Let me come, Dr. Nabarro, to 5 fears that perhaps I am going to reflect in India. The first fear is that the world is threatened with a second wave, Dr. Nabarro. There are fears of a resurgence in China, South Korea, Australia. We believe there are about 30 countries, including some European countries, that are seeing a sudden increase in spurt in cases in the last week or 2 weeks. Should we believe a second wave is upon us, or is this simply a consequence of the unlocking of certain countries at the moment?
Well, this is where I'm possibly going to be seen to be a bit of a pessimist. You see, we talk about first waves, second waves, and so on when we're focusing on influenza pandemics, and they have a very particular periodicity to them. This is a coronavirus pandemic, the first one that we've ever known. And with coronavirus, you get outbreaks of the disease that start as soon as you've got people with the virus. They're very focal. And so you get successive and continuous outbreaks occurring. If you've got movement restricted, then these outbreaks tend to be quite small. Sometimes they don't even build up at all. If you've got lots of movement, the outbreaks can build up quite quickly and become large. So I'm saying there will be a continuous threat of recurrence of outbreaks as movement starts to increase. This is the normal condition we have to face. And societies need to be able to defend against recurrences continuously. So there are recurrences being reported in Singapore, in South Korea, and in Japan, in Germany. There's one in the UK, in Leicester, and of course in other countries as well. It's absolutely to be expected. What we're anticipating is that countries will be able to close them down quickly, and that will be the sign of whether or not they're on top of things.
Let me then come, Dr. Nabarro, to the second fear that's being expressed. The second fear is that there is a new virus that has been found in China. Scientists warning that a new flu virus has been found in pigs and that there could be another flu pandemic building up in China and, dare I say, once again spreading to the rest of the world. How genuine do you see that threat to be of a new virus emerging?
Yes, I heard about that. It's an H1N1 virus, and it's not hugely different from a virus that we had causing a pandemic. in 2009. And of course, it's right that this has been identified. Let me stress, it is not a disease that at the moment is considered able to cause a pandemic in humans. Number two is that every year there are many thousand alerts about possible diseases that can jump from animals to humans. And it's really good that we're on the alert and we're ready to deal with it. But I'm not surprised that there will be reports coming through, and I'm not surprised that we're still struggling and so on with other conditions like Ebola and cholera. This is just the way it is. And so please, everybody, don't believe that we've got another terrible thing about to descend on us. This is just what tends to happen from time to time. You get an alert and you deal with that alert. So that's the stage of anxiety I'd like people to have at the moment, just knowing that it's a bit of an anxiety, but it's being dealt with.
Let me come to the third fear at the moment, Dr. Nabarro. In the absence of a vaccine, people are desperately looking for some kind of a medicine, some kind of a drug. In India, there has been a sudden spurt in doctors prescribing remdesivir. Favipiravir has been used earlier. HCQ, hydroxychloroquine was used. Do you think any of these drugs are actually effective cures against coronavirus? What would your recommendation be?
So there are certain medicines that we know can actually improve survival. And one of those is dexamethasone, and that's because it suppresses the body's immune reactions. And in some people, it seems they get really ill because of a hypersensitivity, a strong immune system that causes other things to go wrong in the body. There are other viruses like remdesivir that are also associated with a measure of improvement. Then there are preparations that have been posed as potential cures, but have subsequently not been shown to be effective through trials. And there, of course, the moment we put hydroxychloroquine in that group. And of course, that's a difficult one because there are many people who are saying that this has some benefits. Just at the moment, the overall judgment is that this is not to be considered a cure, and there are some side effects of the drug. So the general advice is please be very careful on the use of this drug, though there are several quite prominent people who are advocating it, and so one wants to be really careful about giving absolute statements. But my general position for everybody is this. There is no proven cure for the disease COVID-19. And that we have to really understand. And if somebody tells you they have a cure, you really need to ask to see all the evidence. And you need to check to see whether the World Health Organization supports the claim that is made. This is important because we are seeing that some people are spending a lot of money on proposed cures that appear not to be effective, and that is a really unsatisfactory situation.
I want to come then to the vaccine itself. Is there a sign? There are many, of course, in the race. We are told that some are actually now moving into possible human trials at Oxford. Is there a sign of the vaccine anytime soon, according to you, perhaps by the end of the year, as some suggest? And even if the vaccine comes through, there are those who suggest it won't be enough. There are those who believe that even if we get a vaccine, this virus will continue to haunt us. So I want an understanding of how you see this sort of race for a vaccine at the moment and its impact potentially in the future.
So there's a bundle of issues in that question. First thing is an unknown. Truly, we do not know whether or not a person who has had the virus is then fully protected against getting it again or still has some susceptibility. And by the same token, it'll take some time before we can determine whether a person who is vaccinated against the virus will be protected, yes or no. So there's still a lot to be proved just simply on whether or not some of these proposed vaccines will actually work. Then the second question is, will these proposed vaccines be safe? Or is there the possibility that when given to an individual, they will provoke an adverse reaction? When you're using vaccines, you have to be really careful about adverse reactions. And then the third thing, and perhaps the most important of all, is let's say we have 3 or 4 vaccines that are shown to work, and they've gone through the clinical trials to show that they work by early next year. That's not really helpful, because what we really need is enough vaccine for everybody in the world to be able to receive a shot. And that has to be done in a way that really prioritizes the needs of those who have the greatest exposure. And we have to include health workers, and we have to include health workers in poor countries as well as rich countries. And how long is it going to take the world to ensure that everybody who wants can be immunized? I think it'll be a bit of time. So I like to say, let's consider when the world is likely to have a safe and effective vaccine or vaccines that can be made available for all 7.8 billion inhabitants. I think it's 2.5 years, honestly. And that's why I'm asking everybody to plan for living with the virus and getting on top of it for 2.5 years minimum. And if it turns out to be quicker, then I shall be the first person to jump for joy. But I would rather that we have kind of reasonable expectations and then end up with a surprise, rather than have expectations of something very quickly and end up frustrated.
2.5 years is what you're saying could be the possible outer limit by which time the world actually has a vaccine that can be mass produced. Let me turn to another fear, Dr. Nabarro, being expressed now in India. It's not necessarily just those who are senior citizens, potentially therefore in the high-risk group, who are getting corona positive and in some cases seriously infected, but also a lot of people who are younger, in their 30s and 40s, who are succumbing. Should therefore one be concerned with this, particularly because earlier went around saying the virus in India or in South Asia is somehow less virulent than the virus in the West, because we are seeing younger, fitter people also getting infected, Doctor?
Oh, I want to really react to this question again firmly. This is a dangerous virus, and it's dangerous everywhere. And I personally do not want to say that it is less serious in any one country or other. The other thing is that the more we study this virus, the more we find that it has other effects. So at the beginning, it was thought to be primarily a respiratory virus. And then it was found that it was associated with damage to blood vessels, causing blood clots, which meant that there was a raised incidence in some places of heart attacks or of strokes. And now we've got people saying that, the younger people in particular, saying after they've had the virus, they're short of breath for a long time and they're terribly tired. So I like to say to everybody, it is a dangerous virus. It's a cunning virus. It does stuff and we only find out about it afterwards. And we need to do everything possible to hold it at bay, because yes, it seems to be in some places affecting younger people as well as older people. They may have diabetes, they may have high blood pressure, or they may just be super unlucky. And that means everybody, don't dismiss this virus lightly.
I'm glad you've spoken in such plain terms and so cohesively there, Doctor. But I want to ask you, there are a section of epidemiologists who believe that we eventually, while living with the virus, will come closer to achieving herd immunity. How do you go? Is that still a line of thought that you believe we can take, that a country of India's size can achieve herd immunity in the near future?
The term herd immunity is used to describe a situation when a lot of people in a population have been exposed to a disease. They then developed an immunity, which means that they won't be getting that disease again. But the difficulty with thinking about that is, first of all, we don't know whether or not after getting the disease you really are immune from further infection, and whether this applies to everybody or just to some people. And secondly, we really don't know just how many people in the population in your country have actually been exposed without necessarily having symptoms of disease. There's quite a debate about the extent of what we call asymptomatic COVID.
That's right.
My own judgment, and it's just me, and I'm not talking here for WHO, but my judgment as a public health professional is that there are really still a very large number of people in India who are susceptible. So I would think it's quite unwise to anticipate that you are approaching a place nationwide where there is a substantial degree of population immunity or herd immunity.
The reason I also ask this is because in India, what we are seeing, Dr. Nabarro, is many areas which we took for granted as green zones suddenly become either orange or red. I can tell you it's happening in one of my home states of Goa, where suddenly you've had a spurt of cases after having negligible cases initially. Is this just part of the virus's trajectory, Dr. Nabarro, that places will vary there from time to time?
That's just very much what we would expect. There will be green zones that become hotspots because somebody's moved in, they didn't realize they had COVID, they've connected with other people, and the disease has spread. That's why you get zones going from green to red, and then when the outbreaks are suppressed, then they can go back to green again. That's perfectly to be expected.
Let me ask you, therefore, in conclusion, are we in this first week of July, Dr. Nabarro, in a better place today than when I spoke to you in end March, early April? Do you believe that we must be prepared for the worst, as the WHO says? How do you see the glass, particularly from if I were to ask you from an India perspective, is it half full here or half empty?
Oh, please look at the glass half full. First of all, you're a huge country, so there will be a lot of cases. That's the reality. Number two, you've got an amazing community level health system, and that's what's enabling you to find the cases and also to get quite a lot of people under treatment, keep that system working well. Number three, you've got some fabulous healthcare professionals. You're doing really good healthcare. I know you've got some people dying, but at the same time, you've got a lot of people recovering. And number four, and most importantly, you've slowed the spread of this virus dramatically, and you have to try to keep it that way. But yes, there is more to come. But if you had not done what you did in some weeks ago and reduced movement, then the situation would be far, far worse. And that's what we have to remember, that you've been able to tame this virus and make it much, much less damaging to Indian people, Indian society, Indian economy than would otherwise have been the case.
Well, Dr. Nabarro, I think that's a reassuring way to end what's been a half an hour, which I have found extremely educative and enlightening. That's what we are trying to do on the channel, News Without the Noise. Thank you so much, Dr. Nabarro. We hope to connect with you again in a few weeks' time. For now, you've given us plenty to chew on. Thank you very much.
Dhanyavad. I would very much like to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Dhanyavad, Dr. Nabarro. Dhanyavad to you as well. That was Dr. David Nabarro, one of the world's finest minds, telling us about the fight against COVID-19. It's a dangerous virus.
Hi everyone, Preeti Chaudhary here. Hope you like this video. For latest news and analysis, like and subscribe to the India Today YouTube channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated. Thank you for watching.